Facebook community. So I wanted to go ahead and wrap up February. I'm a little late with that, but better late than never. So I want to talk about the books that I read in February. I read 5 books in February, not including Shogun, which I was still continuing in February into March. But other than that, I read 5 books and I had 1 DNF. So let's talk about the books I read in February. I'm just going to go with the stack I have here in this order. There's no particular order of exactly the way I read it, but we'll go with this order. Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. Now, technically, I started this book sometime last year. I don't even remember what month, maybe November. I read 100, 200 pages, maybe a little more than that, and I took a little break. Not that I wasn't enjoying the book. I was enjoying the book, but I felt like I started it sooner than I should have with other books that were a priority over this at that time. So I took a break. Then I came back to it and just really devoured it. I'm not going to say I devoured it in a few days because I didn't. I was reading on this the entire month, but I absolutely love this book. Ryan is doing a great job with this series, the Bound and the Broken series. In fact, this month in March, I've finished. I'm up to date now with the series because I've read The Ice, the final novella, at least the final so far. I'm sure there'll be more novellas and a couple more books, but I'm up to date on it right now. And this obviously is a thick book. This particular one was over 1,000 pages. Is going to be a contender for Book of the Year. Ryan just has such a way with epic fantasy that I'm an epic fantasy reader. I lean more to the side of classic fantasy, I would say, or traditional fantasy, Lord of the Rings, things like that. And this really felt a lot like that. Now, he has a little more coarse language than Tolkien ever used, but aside from that, the world feels epic. You really feel like you're immersed in this particular world, and I just really enjoyed it. I can't say enough about it. So glad I started this series last year, and I look forward to maybe towards the end of this year, 2024, we'll get the next book. I don't know, possibly. I think Ryan has hinted at that, so look forward to moving on to that whenever I can. Next is The Blade Itself. Now, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This was a book that I put a poll on Twitter, and I said, what series should I start next? And I had this, I had Game of Thrones, I had a few others of series that I plan on starting this year, but just haven't gotten around to it yet. I know I haven't read Game of Thrones, haven't read The First Law yet. Well, this won, and so I read book 1 of this series, and oh my goodness. I'm going to be honest, the first, not quite a third, probably maybe 25% of it, I was a little mixed on it. I didn't feel like it was living up to the expectations that had been set for it, and if you've heard anything about this series and this author, huge expectations. I didn't feel like it was living up to that, and something changed. He put it into a next gear, and everything people say, and I'm just repeating what other people say really, about the character work. Yeah, there was, I remember what it was. There was one particular character, there was 2 characters that was introduced at the beginning, well, 3 characters introduced towards the beginning, and I liked both of their POVs, but then there was a third that I did not care for. In fact, every time I came to this particular character's POV, I was rolling my eyes. I didn't want to read it. He changed. Not really the character himself changed. He still was a little aggravating, but the character developed, and I enjoyed reading more of it, and I look forward to continuing on with this series. I definitely plan on reading book 2. Joe Abercrombie, great character work, and I love character work. The next book I have on the list here is The Blackest Heart by Brian Lee Durfee. I read Forgetting Moon in January. I read The Blackest Heart in February. And let me say some things about this. I told you I had a DNF. This was my DNF. But I need to qualify that. It has nothing to do with Brian Lee Durfee's writing. His writing is great. You get immersed into the world. It's again epic fantasy, and as I've already said, I love epic fantasy. That's my thing. The world is so epic in its scope. He's building this dark, Blackest Heart. He's building this dark world for you that is enjoyable in a lot of ways, but also makes you cringe in a lot of ways, and all that's okay. I went into this expecting to be disturbed a little bit. I went into this expecting to be bothered a little bit. And I've read other darker fantasies, more grimdark fantasy, and I was okay with it. So I said, well, I'm going to read this. He pushed it for me. Now, again, this is absolutely personal. This is absolutely my opinion. He went a little further than I believe I could go in aspects of, there was some violence towards children that was quite graphic. I have small children. It just bothered me. I understand why he would include something like that in his book. It makes sense in this world. Also, and probably the main thing that just drove this for me was several acts of sexual assault. Not fade to black, not closed door, right there on the page. And it happened not once, not twice, but several times. And for me personally, it was more than it crossed a line I don't particularly want to cross in my reading. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't, that someone else wouldn't find enjoyment in the story. I found a lot of enjoyment in the story, but it just took me out of the story from the amount that was in there, if that makes sense. And so I made a choice almost halfway through to DNF. You decide for yourself what you're going to do. The next book is stepping away from epic fantasy like I've been showing you. And this was, I didn't plan on reading this book last month. I guess you'd call it a palate cleanser, which is there was also another one that I'll get to that was a palate cleanser. This is The Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. This, I believe, is his second novel. Maybe he had more, but I know he has two popular novels. There was one before this named Mary. I haven't gotten to that yet. I picked this up off of the recommendation of some other people who write for Fanfiatic, who I also blog for. And it just sounded interesting. They said it's Stephen King-esque. Now, you have to be careful when people say something like something's like Stephen King, because that's a seller point that a lot of people want. They want to use his name to sell books. I think he was rightfully so here. Not that Nat Cassidy writes just like Stephen King, but there are several homages here to Stephen King. There are several tributes here to Stephen King. There's a scene where a man is reading a novel, very reminiscent of Salem's Lot. One man meets someone else in a park, and that person's reading a book, and it happened to be one man was reading a Stephen King novel, was reading Salem's Lot. This is supposed to be a new spin on vampires, and it was a new spin on vampires. In fact, if someone hadn't have told me that it was a new spin on vampires, I'm not sure that I would have called the monster in this particular book a vampire, just because it's so different than what you're used to. I can see the connections, but at the same time, it's different. It's totally different from vampires. If you're thinking Dracula, I want to suck your blood, it's not that. It's something different, but it's still very, very interesting, very, very creepy. Very creepy. Again, it deals with a baby and the parents who move into a new area, move into a new building, and then there's some strange things going on in the building. I'll say this, I'm still a little confused about the ending, which also may be Stephen King-esque, because people say that Stephen King doesn't often land or has a different, there's lots of different opinions on Stephen King's endings. I'm not 100% sure I completely understand the ending, though it was still satisfying at the same time, if that makes sense. I recommend. The last book that I read, and you all can already probably see what it is is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Now, last year I read Recursion by Blake Crouch, and I think I told y'all it blew me away. Just fast-paced science fiction thriller. A lot of people compare Blake Crouch to Michael Crichton. I've never read Michael Crichton, so I can't make that comparison, but other people make that comparison. But still, I actually read this with a friend of mine, and he had a lot of the same feelings as I did. It also makes you think. It makes you reflect on yourself and how you would deal with this certain situation that he goes through. Very self-reflective. It deals with parenthood. It deals with relationship. It deals with those you love. And what if something happened that separated you from those you love? And a very good read. I look forward to reading more about Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch is, I hate to throw around the word favorite author, because I believe that favorite author should be something that's held for the best of the best for you. Now, we're each going to have different favorite authors. But so far, 2 books I've read by Blake Crouch, they have been entertaining. They have been made you reflect on yourself, make you ask deep questions, but also just a good read. And so, who knows, he may be climbing that ladder for me. That's what I read. Those were my reads in February. What about you? What did you read? What stood out to you in February as you read, or even what you're reading now? Until next time, go read books.